Good morning, everyone. It is a Monday morning, and here we are on the Morning Mindset, 8/26/2019. So this week, I'm going to be doing a special sales series talking about sales, talking to you guys about prospecting, talking about how to manage your calls, your opportunity calls, discovery calls, closing calls, whatever they may be. And I felt that this would be kind of fortuitous here. I've got actually a number of my salespeople kind of starting some of our specialized programs with the Beto Paredes family companies. And so I'm going to find this to be highly valuable. One of the things that I'm letting you guys know is pretty awesome. I was cleaning out my Google Plus because I just haven't been using it. And I didn't realize that if you had a Google Suite account that you still had Google Plus. I thought they got rid of that, but they got rid of it for consumers. And by going through there, I had actually found 42 of my morning mindsets from 2016. How's that? So my team's actually going through all of those and reformatting them, putting in new slides, a few things like that. And that will be available on my YouTube channel. So I imagine it'll probably take them at least a week to launch those. And these are from 2016 when I was really heavy doing the mindsets before. And probably some of my ideas are a little bit different these days than they were back then. But some of the stuff was very valuable. And I just, for any of you that are enjoying the morning mindsets, that'll be fun for you. So we're going to be putting that up on our YouTube channel here throughout this week. So I found 42. I did probably about 130 of them, but I had about 42 of them that were in the archive in Google Plus. So that's pretty awesome. So look for that. Okay, so special sales series. Here we are Monday morning. This is a really important detail. I tried to think about, what would I deliver to everyone as far as level of importance all the way down through the week. So all of the things that we're going to be talking about this week are probably going to be very important. But let's talk about something that's absolutely critical. So committing a prospect to actions that validate interest is critical. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the fog that happens sometimes when you're building a pipeline as a salesperson and why it's very important to understand this rule and to follow this rule. This rule will greatly increase the ability for you to move sales forward over time. Obviously, the ultimate is the close. Now, for any of you that have ever done a one-call close, I have literally called thousands of companies, probably well over 30,000 cold calls in the time that I've been doing professional sales. And very infrequently, I think maybe 4 or 5 times in my life has there ever been a one-call close. And because of that, you've got to be very intelligent about the way you move things forward in a sales cycle. So committing a prospect to actions that validate interest is critical. So what are we talking about? If you're on your first opportunity call, your first discovery call with a customer, it's kind of the get to know each other call. You're letting them speak about their business, asking a lot of good questions. Well, at the end of that call, there is a moment where you've got to think about it's going to come next. What's going to happen in the next call? What do you want to happen in the next call? What needs to happen in the next call? Well, usually what happens is you have the next call because you set it, right? And again, I'll kind of give you some advice here on setting another call every time you're on a call. We'll talk about that. But a lot of times what ends up happening, and this is, again, I'm talking about the fog of sales, is they commit to another call. You get onto that next call, and maybe you go a little bit further into the information. Maybe they have great questions, but you're leaving a lot of maybes on the table. And depending on the kind of person you're selling to, there's a lot of different personality types out there. Now, a lot of people go by the categories of like the owl, the tiger, the bull. A bull is going to be very focused on figuring out whether or not this is even worth it to their company. But when you run into the tigers, the guys that are very collaborative, they like new information, they like learning stuff. They may just be daydreaming about your service or your product with their company, and they may be very intrigued by what it is that you're selling. So you get on that second call, and they're very happy to hear from you. And they're very happy to continue the dialogue and the discussion. And we can get caught up a lot of times believing that there's value in that, right? Oh man, he's still very excited. Obviously, he had some better questions this time, but we're kind of leaving that to the subservience of what may or may not happen in that call, on that call specifically. We didn't prepare well enough to have an objective of that call or an outcome in that call. So when you're on the first call, you have to think very specifically about what you would like to commit them to, and you've got to listen very closely to how busy they are and just what level of commitment you can get. So obviously the biggest commitment we can get from somebody is, yes, let me get out my pen, I'm going to write you a check, could you please send the contract? That's the commitment we're looking for. Well, if you're not at that level, if it's not time for that and you're wrapping your call up, what you have to do in order to facilitate actionable relational move forward with the individual prospect is you have to commit them to something. Mr. Prospect, I'm going to send you a deck. In the deck, it's going to explain everything about what we're doing. If you don't mind, could you read slide 3? It's mostly based about the actual services that we have. I'd like to talk to you about that specifically when we talk next. That was a commitment. I just asked for that individual to do something between now and the next call, okay? Now this is critical. You're gonna hear all kinds of stuff. Oh man, if I got time to do that, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna have time. Or yeah, absolutely, we can do that. I'm very interested in checking out your deck. So it doesn't necessarily matter to some degree exactly what the commitment is, because your sales will be different in different products and services. But it's important that whatever you do commit them to garners a better conversation the next time you get on the phone with them. And it teaches you a tremendous amount about the prospect and the move forward in the sales cycle if they actually did it. So when you get back on the phone, say, listen, I'd sent that deck out to you. I wanted you to kind of check out slide 3 and read through that. What are your thoughts? Right? Instead of just pulling up that third slide and saying, okay, let's run through it, ask them what they thought about it. Well, that's going to tell you immediately if they even took the time to review it. Because if somebody's serious about moving forward in a commitment, they're going to do a lot more than just jump on 5 calls with you going through the cycle. So many of you that have been in sales for a while, again, getting back to the fog of the sales pipeline, have been in a position where you're like, man, every time I call this guy, he's excited. He tells me that he can see this really working for their company, and it's just not a good time right now, whatever it might be. And you're 7, 8 calls in, and the reason you get stuck in that fog or in that cycle is simply because you're not committing them on each call to something more. And that needs to be every call that you're on. So if you're on the second call, let's say that you committed them to reading that third slide, the main services slide, right? The next potential thing may be, well, listen, let me send you a copy of our contract. Okay, so I'm not saying we're going to sign it today, but you may as well take a look at the actual contract itself. So when we talk next, we can be a lot more specific as to how this will look for your company once we get you signed up. That's another commitment that can happen. So when you're sitting speaking with somebody, write down on a notebook a couple little commitments that you can make every single call, so that when you move forward and you commit them to that, they know that you're moving them forward because you're asking them to take actions between calls that's getting closer to actually that close, okay? Back in the day, I used to call this the tourniquet. That's not necessarily such a good name because obviously, a tourniquet, you lose blood and, that never ends well. But the reality is when you're moving things forward like a tourniquet, you're turning that, you're tighter, you're tightening it up. Every time you get off the call, you're tightening it up because you're trying to get to the moment in time when they make that final commitment. So you're actually getting them to take actions that are indicative of your final result, which is to get a contract signed with the individual company, right? So small commitments moving forward are very important. At the end of a call, always set the next meeting time. Now I put this here, this is very 101 sales. I'm very surprised a lot of times how many people don't do this. And I want to talk about it in a little bit different fashion than you may be thinking. So if you're on the call with a decision maker, a CEO, CFO, someone who can actually write a check or at least facilitate getting the contract looked at so it can be signed. When you're on the call with them, it's evident that you need to make the next meeting time before you get off the phone. So if you're not doing that now, you have to do that. But it's with everyone, okay? The gatekeeper, the secretary. If you haven't made your way up to speaking with the decision maker yet, and you know your next call is going to be the same call with the secretary or potentially some kind of a gatekeeper, then commit them. Say, listen, I'm going to get some stuff out to you. Can I get the email address so I can send it? You can share it with your boss. And do you mind if I call you back on Wednesday and just see how that went? Now, gatekeepers, secretaries, you will be surprised, actually like that, because it gives them this different level of importance in the model. And we're going to talk about gatekeepers and secretaries and all kinds of stuff here in this week, okay? Because there's a very, very important method to keeping the philosophy that there are no gatekeepers, okay? You close everyone. And so we'll get into that. But it's important that you always commit the next time. And it doesn't matter whether it's the decision maker or not. Now, if it is, obviously, it's extremely important. At the end of the call, always say, well, listen, I'm going to have you take a look at this deck. How long do you think it'll take you to review that? When do you think you can? Okay, that's another really good question. Okay, so I'm going to get this over to you. I want you to read the third slide. That's the one that has all services on it. When do you think you can take the time to do that? Well, that's a really good question too, because now they have to think about it. Oh, well, not today, but probably Friday. Okay, well, awesome. Since you're going to take the time to do that Friday, let's set to actually have a follow-up meeting on Monday. Okay, so you can kind of use that diction to figure out when the best time is going to be without aggressively going for the exact next appointment and potentially putting something on the table that may be difficult for them. Oh, there's no way I can meet you this week. Just call me back next week, right? If you're talking about the commitment that you're making with them is, to review the slide, whatever it is, find out when they're going to do that. And then from there, set something the very next day, okay? So commit them to something before the next meeting. If you do not, you will end up having the same meeting again. How many of you have had that happen? Real excited about the product, love it, see how it could work for our company. Love talking to you, Mr. Salesperson, Mrs. Salesperson, because you're the one that knows all the information about the product. And so I get to cast my mind with you a little bit and see how it would work in our business. And I love it. But where's the commitment? Are you moving forward? So that is a rule that you want to set for yourself, that every time you speak with someone, you want to come up with a couple of things during that conversation that you can use as a hook to commit them to an action or an activity that's going to lead you into the next discussion with a much more powerful presence, because there was something to review, there was a commitment that was made, and you're going to learn a lot. Now, I didn't have time to review it, didn't have time to look through it. Well, if they didn't have time to look through it, then that becomes the pulpit per se in the conversation. Well, no problem. Why don't we go ahead and review that now together, because it was important. So instead of asking them exactly what they thought about it, what you don't want to do is say, okay, well, I see that you didn't have time. When will you have the time to do it? So now you're just pushing that time frame forward and forward, and that can become very irritating for an owner, okay, or CEO or someone that's going to be writing a check. So you just bring it up, say, okay, no problem. Well, let's talk about it. Since you didn't have the time to do it, you review it, commit them to something new. Okay, it's important that it's not just the same commitment over and over and over, because what's very difficult for individual companies a lot of times, or owners, is oh man, he wants me to read that slide. I can't talk to him right now. And on that note, don't make your commitments large. Okay, don't say read all 11 pages of the contract. Be specific. Okay, our policy for our SaaS system is in the third page of the contract. That's probably one of the things that makes us very unique, is the way we actually work with individual companies that way. It's a differentiator for our company. Could I just have you read that one page before we meet next? So keep your commitments courteous and simple, so that they know they can get it done in 10 minutes, so that they can prepare for the call and have that done. So another trick, you could say, not trick, we're going to try to avoid that word in sales, okay? Because nothing's a trick. You want to be very straightforward, so forgive me. But another thing that you can do is email them ahead of time, text them a little bit ahead of time, maybe 2 or 3 hours before your meeting, and just say, hey, just wanted to remind you, take a look at that slide. I'm going to want to talk with you about that when we get on the call. So that also gives you a much better way of a little bit of communication ahead of time. And here's why that's so important. It is actually very critical. I may even do an entire mindset on this, but I am a very busy person myself. I buy things. Okay, we have vendors in our company as well. There's sometimes I'll take a look at software, CRMs, mailing services, data. A lot of stuff we do here. We buy a lot of data, so I have a lot of data providers call us on a consistent basis. And even if I have scheduled a meeting with you, if I don't remember or I'm not prepared because it's just on my calendar, but I've got 10 calls I'm taking care of, 3 people I'm dealing with internally, and it suddenly comes up and I've got 10 minutes and I'm like, oh, dang it, I've got that meeting with Beto. It very well may be that I'm just too busy. Not that I am. I've used my time well, let's just say, as a CEO. I didn't remember or I wasn't reminded well enough that this meeting was coming up. So I filled that time up. Okay. I mean, most owners and CEOs aren't just sitting around drinking coffee and like, oh, well, I've not got nothing to do and can't wait for that meeting. Always try to get a text out to them if you can get their personal number and email. Just say, hey, we're going to be meeting in an hour. Just wanted to make sure, that if you could take a look at that slide, whatever it might be, if you can get them 1 hour before the meeting time on text, email, whatever it is, well, then that person's going to say, okay, I've got this meeting coming up, and they'll start finishing up whatever it is that they may be working on. If you'll just do that, all of the missed meetings that you have will go from 50% down to 10% or 20%, because a lot of times people don't make their committed meetings simply because they didn't remember all the way up until 10 minutes before and they got themselves busy. So that's just something I wanted to kind of throw out there as well. But anyways, this is a really important concept. Start using it. Okay, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff this week, so I would highly suggest you guys get on the morning mindset this week, especially if you're in sales. I will be in the office the entire week, so Monday through Friday this week, we're going to be doing these. Hopefully you learned something solid today. Let's get some fire in our cups. Let's do really well today. If you're prospecting, start using this methodology. Thank you for joining me for the morning mindset, and let's get out there and make it a great day. I'll be back here tomorrow morning.